Hello and welcome to the Domain on Access Control of the CISSP certification course offered by Simplilearn. In IT security, the term access control means ensuring people and other entities like services and processes are identified and authenticated before being allowed to access the system or perform any action on the network. Access control is the second of the 10 domains of the common body of knowledge for the CISSP certification exam. This domain outlines the various information system security options that control access to an organization's information and data processing resources. Next, let us look at the domain objectives. After completing this domain, you will be able to describe the concepts and techniques of access control, explain methodologies of access control and their implementation in decentralized and centralized environments, distinguish between detective and corrective access control, explain the mechanisms for controlling system use, identify potential vulnerabilities, risks, and exposures. It is essential to understand the role access controls play in IT security. We will begin with a scenario demonstrating the importance of access controls. Kevin Butler is a security administrator in the Network Firewall Division at Nutri Worldwide, Inc. He is preparing for his CISSP exam. He received an email from Sergey Stankovich, the project manager responsible for the Firewall Division. It stated that, as a part of the strong focus on security this financial year, Nutri Worldwide, Inc. would perform 2 cycles of security audits instead of 1. The following processes will be audited with rigor this year: access controls, access control implementation, access control monitoring. Kevin wrote Sergey suggesting that the audit can also check how mitigation is planned to avoid the threats to access controls that Nutri Worldwide, Inc. has faced in the last year. Sergey was impressed by Kevin's suggestion. Kevin understands the importance of access controls. The additional security audits that are planned by his company reflect the same. The mission statement of this audit was later announced to all the IT security team. It read, "Protecting networks, applications, and data from attack is of utmost importance. This will be achieved through extensive security audits that audit current security practices, policies, and processes and suggest improvement actionable to be implemented. Examine and authenticate security through penetration testing and vulnerability assessments." Access controls protect systems and resources from unauthorized access. After successful authentication, they can also participate in determining the authorization level. In this topic, we will describe key terms related to access control, describe the identity and access provisioning lifecycle. To be able to access a set of data or a resource, a subject has to be identified, authenticated, and authorized. The process is shown here. Identification describes a method of ensuring that a subject, such as user, program, or process, is a real entity as it claims to be. Identification can be provided by username or account number. Authentication is the testing or reconciliation of evidence of a user's identity. It establishes the user's identity and ensures that the users are genuine. To be properly authenticated, the subject is usually required to provide a second piece to the credential set. This piece could be password, passphrase, cryptographic key, personal identification number or PIN, anatomical attribute, or token. Authorization is granting access to an object after the subject has been properly identified and authenticated. It is the rights and permissions granted to an individual or a process, which enable their access to a computer resource. Once a user's identity and authentication are established, authorization levels determine the extent of system rights that an operator can hold. For example, a user authorized for a net banking transaction. The following screen will focus on privacy, accountability, and identity management. In this screen, we will focus on identity and access provisioning lifecycle. After an appropriate access control model has been selected and deployed, the identity and access provisioning lifecycle must be maintained and secured. We will learn each access control model later in this domain. Several organizations follow best practices for issuing access. However, many of them lack formal processes. Identity and access provisioning lifecycle refers to the provisioning, review, revocation of all accounts. Provisioning includes creating new accounts and provisioning them with appropriate rights and privileges. Review can be called auditing. It includes checking all the accounts periodically. It also includes disabling the inactive accounts and checking for excessive privileges. Revocation includes disabling employees' account as soon as they leave the organization. It also includes setting account expiry date for temporary accounts. An appropriate organization policy should be followed for deleting an expired account. As a best practice, always include account revocation as a required step in the access provisioning lifecycle. This process should be tightly coordinated with the Human Resources Department and track not only terminations, but also horizontal and vertical moves or promotions within the organization. The next topic focuses on identification, authentication, and authorization. We will now begin the next topic, which deals with different concepts associated with identification, authentication, and authorization. In this screen, we will talk about verifying identification information. The function of identification is to map a known quantity to an unknown entity to make it known. The known quantity is called the identifier, or ID, and the unknown entity needs identification. A basic requirement for identification is the ID be unique. IDs may be scoped, that is, they are unique only within a particular scope. Once the user has been identified through the user ID or a similar value, the next step is authentication. There are three general factors that can be used for authentication, and they are something a person knows, something a person has, and something a person is. Something a person knows can be a password, PIN, mother's maiden name, or a combination to a lock. Authenticating a person by something that the individual knows is usually the least expensive to implement. The downside to this method is that another person may acquire this knowledge and gain unauthorized access to a system or facility. Something a person has can be a key, swipe card, access card, or badge. This method is common for accessing facilities. However, it can also be used to access sensitive areas or to authenticate systems. A downside to this method is that the item can be lost or stolen, which could result in unauthorized access. Something specific to a person is based on a physical attribute. Authenticating a person's identity based on a unique physical attribute is referred to as biometrics. The next screen deals with strong authentication methods. In this screen, we will discuss the characteristics of biometrics in detail. Biometrics verifies an individual's identity by analyzing a unique personal attribute or behavior, which is one of the effective and accurate methods of verifying identification. It is also sophisticated, expensive, and complex. Biometric identifiers are the distinctive, measurable characteristics used to label and describe individuals. The two categories of biometric identifiers are physiological and behavioral characteristics. Physiological characteristics can include voice, DNA, or handprint. Behavioral characteristics are related to the behavior of a person, including but not limited to typing rhythm, gait, and voice. Biometrics is a sophisticated technology, thus it is much more expensive and complex than the other types of identity verification processes. Apart from the accuracy of the biometric system, the other factors important for the selection of biometrics are acceptance, throughput rate, and enrollment time. User acceptance of biometric system is an important factor. It depends on privacy, intrusiveness, and psychological or physical discomfort. Example, in retina scan, the potential exchange of body fluid is a disadvantage. Throughput rate is also called biometric system response time. It is the time taken to process authentication request. It describes the process of authentication in a biometric system. Throughput rate should be around 6 to 10 seconds. Enrollment time is the time taken by the biometric system to register and create an account for the first time. It describes the process of registering with a biometric system. Users provide a username, identity, a password, or a PIN, and then biometric information by taking a photograph of their irises or by swiping their fingers on a fingerprint reader. Enrollment is a one-time process that should take less than 2 minutes. In the next screen, we will look at a list of biometrics used for identification today. Let us look at each type of biometrics. A number of biometric controls are used today. The following subsections describe the major implementations and their specific details pertaining to access control security. Fingerprints are made up of ridge endings and bifurcations exhibited by the friction ridges and other detailed characteristics that are called minutiae. It is the distinctiveness of these minutiae that gives each individual a unique fingerprint. The shape of a person's hand, the length and width of the hand and fingers, defines hand geometry. This trait differs significantly between people and is used in some biometric systems to verify identity. The iris is the colored portion of the eye that surrounds the pupil. The iris has unique patterns, rifts, colors, rings, coronas, and furrows. A system that reads a person's retina scans the blood vessel patterns of the retina on the rear of the eyeball. This pattern has shown to be unique in different people. VoicePrint is a biometric system that is programmed to capture a voice print and compare it to the information captured in a reference file. This process can differentiate one individual from another. Keyboard dynamics captures electrical signals when a person types a certain phrase. Signature dynamics is a method that captures the electrical signals when a person signs a name. Facial scan is a system that scans a person's face, takes many attributes and characteristics into account like bone structures, nose ridges, eye widths, forehead sizes, chin shapes, etc. In the next screen, we will look at how biometrics can be evaluated for accuracy. In this screen, we will focus on passwords. User identification coupled with a reusable password is the most common form of system identification and authorization mechanisms. A password is a protected string of characters used to authenticate an individual. As stated previously, authentication factors are based on what a person knows, has, or is. A password is what the user knows. It is important that the passwords are strong and properly managed. The main problems with passwords are they are insecure, can be easily broken, inconvenient for users to remember, and repudiable. Some of the common password attacks are: dictionary attack can be carried out using tools such as Crack, John the Ripper, etc. Brute force attack using Loftcrack. Hybrid attack, which includes both dictionary and brute force attacks. Other forms of attacks include the Trojan Horse login program, which uses password-sending Trojans, and social engineering attacks. An example of social engineering attack is extracting password by tricking the users. The next screen describes how passwords can be protected. The use of passwords is a common practice for validating a user's identity during the authentication process. In most traditional authentication solutions, the password is the only undisclosed entity in the transaction. Hence, care should be taken in the process of creation of passwords and its management by users and systems. It is necessary to define policies, procedures, and controls regarding passwords. A process governing user password should consider the following. If the user can choose their own passwords, the operating system should enforce certain password requirements. The operating system can require that a password contain a certain number of characters unrelated to the user ID, include special characters, include upper and lowercase letters, and not be easily guessable. Many systems enable administrators to set expiration dates for passwords, forcing users to change them at regular intervals. Create policies for password resets and changes. The system may also keep a list of the last 5 to 10 passwords, password history, and not let the users revert to the previously used passwords. Use of last login dates and banners is also recommended. A threshold can be set to allow a certain number of unsuccessful logon attempts. After the threshold is met, the user's account can be locked for a period or indefinitely, which requires an administrator to manually unlock the account. System can be configured to limit concurrent connections from the users. An audit trail can also be used to track password usage and successful and unsuccessful logon attempts. This audit information should include the date, time, user ID, and workstation the user logged on from. In the next screen, we will look at different types of passwords. A passphrase is a sequence of characters that is longer than a password. A passphrase is secured than a password as it is longer and thus harder to obtain by an attacker. In many cases, the user is more likely to remember a passphrase than a password. Example of passphrase are, I will pass CISSP exam. Manchester United is my favorite team. A quick brown fox jumps over a lazy dog, etc. Cognitive passwords are opinion or fact-based information used to verify an individual's identity. A user is enrolled by answering several questions based on life experiences. Passwords can be hard for people to remember. However, the same person will not forget simple personal information. The user can answer the questions to be authenticated instead of remembering a password. Few of examples of cognitive passwords include, what is the name of the high school you attended? How many family members do you have? What is your mother's maiden name? A one-time password, or OTP, is also called a dynamic password, which is used for authentication purposes. After the password is used, it is no longer valid. Thus, if a hacker obtained this password, it cannot be reused. This type of authentication mechanism is used in environments that require a higher level of security than static passwords can provide. The token device generates the one-time password for the user to submit to an authentication server. For example, OTP sent by bank via SMS. In the next screen, we will look at token devices and how they are used for authentication. This screen will focus on memory cards and smart cards, which are used widely in identity verification. A memory card holds information, however, cannot process information. A memory card can hold a user's authentication information, so the user only needs to type in a user ID or PIN and present the memory card. And if the data entered by the user matches the data on the memory card, the user is successfully authenticated. A smart card holds information and has the necessary hardware and software to process the information. It has a microprocessor and integrated circuits incorporated into the card, which enables it to process the information. Smart cards are of two types, contact and contactless. The contact smart card has a gold seal on the card. When this card is inserted into a card reader, electrical fingers wipe against the card in the exact position that the chip contacts are located. This will supply power and data input-output to the chip for authentication. The contactless smart card has an antenna wire that surrounds the perimeter of the card. When this card comes within an electromagnetic field of the reader, the antenna within the card generates enough energy to power the internal chip. There are two types of contactless smart cards, and they are hybrid and combi. The hybrid card has two chips, with the capability of utilizing both the contact and contactless formats. The combi card has one microprocessor chip that can communicate with the contact or contactless readers. In the next screen, we will discuss some common attacks on smart cards. This screen will focus on access criteria, which are the crux of authentication. Granting access rights to subjects should be based on the level of trust a company has and the subjects need to know. How much a user is to be trusted or the extent of information entrusted to a user are issues that must be identified and integrated into the access criteria. The different access criteria can be enforced by roles, groups, location, time, and transaction types. Using roles is an efficient way to assign rights to a type of user who performs a certain task. This role is based on a job assignment or function. Using groups is another effective way of assigning access control rights. If several users require the same type of access to information and resources, putting them into a group and then assigning rights and permissions to that group is easier to manage than assigning rights and permissions to individuals separately. Physical or logical location can also be used to restrict access to resources. Some files may be available only to users who can log on interactively to a computer. This means the user must be physically present in front of the computer and enter the credentials locally and cannot log on remotely from another computer. Logical location restrictions are usually done through network address restrictions. Time of day or temporal isolation is another access control mechanism that can be used. If a security professional wants to ensure no one is accessing payroll files between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m., that configuration can be implemented. Transaction type restrictions can be used to control the data access during certain functions and the commands that can be carried out on the data. An online banking program may allow a customer to view his account balance, but may not allow the customer to transfer money until he has a certain security level or access right. The next few screens will look at authorization concepts. This screen will focus on single sign-on. Single sign-on, or SSO, is an access control method where a user can authenticate once and be able to access different information systems without individual re-authentication. In other words, it allows a user to enter credentials one time and be able to access all corporate resources in primary and secondary network domains. In SSO, applications and systems are logically connected to a centralized authentication service that controls user authentication. When a user first logs into an application, they will be required to provide a user ID and password, or two-factor, biometric, etc. The application and the centralized service will recognize the user as logged in. Later, when the user wishes to access a different application or system, the user's logged-in state will be recognized and directly admitted to the application. As seen in the table, the advantage of SSO is the convenience of eliminating many redundant logins for busy end users. That is, user has one password for all enterprise systems and applications, and only one strong password can be remembered and used. A user account can be quickly created on hire and deleted on dismissal. Another advantage is it gives the centralized management of access for many applications and systems. A distinct disadvantage of SSO is it is hard to implement and get working. It can also be a source of centralized point of failure. Another disadvantage in SSO is if a user's login credentials are compromised, an intruder will have access to all the applications and systems that the user has. In the next screen, we will look at a few SSO technologies. Some examples of SSO technologies are listed here. Kerberos Authentication Protocol uses a key distribution, or KDC, and tickets, and is based on symmetric key cryptography. The Secure European System for Applications in a Multi-Vendor Environment, or Sesame Authentication Protocol, uses PAS and PACs and is based on symmetric and asymmetric cryptography. Security domain is where all resources working under the same security policy are managed by the same group. Directory services is a network service which identifies resources such as printers, file servers, etc. on a network and makes them available to users and programs. Thin clients or dumb terminals rely on a central server for access control, processing, and storage. The next screen will focus on Kerberos. Kerberos is the name of a three-headed dog that guards the entrance of Hades, underworld, in Greek mythology. The Kerberos security system guards a network with three elements: authentication, authorization, and auditing. Kerberos is an authentication protocol and was designed in the mid-1980s as a part of MIT's Project Athena. It works in a client-server model and is based on symmetric key cryptography. The protocol has been used for years in Unix and in Windows operating systems. Kerberos is an example of a single sign-on system for distributed environments and is a de facto standard for heterogeneous networks. It uses symmetric key cryptography and provides end-to-end security. Most Kerberos implementations work with shared secret keys. The major roles of Kerberos are described here. The Key Distribution Center, or KDC, holds all users and services' secret keys. It provides an authentication service as well as key distribution functionality. The clients and services trust the integrity of the KDC, and this trust is the foundation of Kerberos security. The KDC is divided into Authentication Server, or AS, and Ticket Granting Server, or TGS. Authentication Server, or AS, authenticates the identities of entities on the network, and TGS generates unique session keys between two parties. Parties then use these session keys for message encryption. The KDC provides security services to principals, which can be users, applications, or network services. The KDC must have an account for and share a secret key with each principal. For users, a password is transformed into a secret key value. The secret key is used to send sensitive data back and forth between the principal and the KDC and is used for user authentication purposes. Ticket Granting Server, or TGS. Tickets are generated by the KDC and given to a principal. The ticket enables one principal to authenticate another principal. For example, user needs to authenticate another principal, let's say a print server. A KDC provides security services for a set of principals. This set is called a realm in Kerberos. The KDC is the trusted authentication server for all users, applications, and services within a realm. One KDC can be responsible for one or several realms. Realms are used to allow an administrator to logically group resources and users. In the next screen, we will look at Kerberos Steps. The components that participate in Kerberos authentication are shown in figure. When a user wishes to log on to the network and access a print server, the following steps are performed. Client contacts the KDC, which acts as an authentication server, to request authentication. The client authenticates on the authentication server, or AS. This creates a user session that will expire, typically in 8 hours. The KDC sends client a session key encrypted with client's secret key. The KDC also sends a ticket granting ticket, TGT, encrypted with the TGS's secret key back to the client system. Client decrypts the session key and uses it to request permission to print from the TGS. The client sends the TGT to the TGS to get authenticated. Checking the validity of the session key of the client and proving the identity claim, the TGS sends the client a CS session key, second session key, to use for printing. The TGS also sends a service ticket, or ST, encrypted with the print server's key. The TGS creates an encrypted key with an expiration time and sends it to the client. The client sends the service ticket to the print server. The print server confirms that the ST is still valid by checking the expiration time. Seeing a valid CS session key, the server recognizes the permission to print and also knows the client is authentic. The communication is established between the client and the print server. In the next screen, we will look at some of Kerberos's drawbacks. The components that participate in Kerberos authentication are shown in figure. When a user wishes to log on to the network and access a print server, the following steps are performed. Client contacts the KDC, which acts as an authentication server, to request authentication. The client authenticates on the authentication server, or AS. This creates a user session that will expire, typically in 8 hours. The KDC sends client a session key encrypted with client's secret key. The KDC also sends a ticket granting ticket, TGT, encrypted with the TGS's secret key back to the client system. Client decrypts the session key and uses it to request permission to print from the TGS. The client sends the TGT to the TGS to get authenticated. Checking the validity of the session key of the client and proving the identity claim, the TGS sends the client a CS session key, second session key, to use for printing. The TGS also sends a service ticket, or ST, encrypted with the print server's key. The TGS creates an encrypted key with an expiration time and sends it to the client. The client sends the service ticket to the print server. The print server confirms that the ST is still valid by checking the expiration time. Seeing a valid CS session key, the server recognizes the permission to print and also knows the client is authentic. The communication is established between the client and the print server. In the next screen, we will look at some of Kerberos's drawbacks. Some of the problems of Kerberos are listed here. A single KDC is a sole point of failure and performance bottleneck. If the KDC goes down, no one can access needed resources. Redundancy is necessary for the KDC. Computers must have clocks synchronized within 5 minutes of each other. The KDC must be able to handle the number of requests it receives on time. It must be scalable. Secret keys are temporarily stored on the user's workstations, which mean it is possible for an intruder to obtain these cryptographic keys. If the workstation is compromised, the identities can be forged. If the KDC is hacked, security is lost. Kerberos is vulnerable to password guessing. The KDC does not recognize a dictionary attack. Network traffic is not protected by Kerberos if encryption is not enabled. Hilda Jacob, General Manager, IT Security, Nutri Worldwide Inc., needed an advanced security system which can seamlessly integrate with the existing web-based application. This system should give an option for one-time password or dynamic password security token as the second factor. The security team that Kevin is a part of opted for a third-party online security and identity management tool. This raised the confidence among all the employees for using the web applications and doing all their online transactions. The new multi-factor authentication system integrated fully with the existing application and also fulfilled all the organization's needs. Which are the two factors that Kevin needs to use for a two-factor authentication? Kevin should use any two factors out of something you know, password, PIN, something you have, smart card, ATM card, something you are, biometrics, fingerprint, retina. Controls are implemented to mitigate risk and reduce the potential for loss. In this section, we will discuss the various types of access controls. In this screen, we will focus on types of access control. Access control types or methods can fall into one of three categories: administrative, technical, or physical. Administrative, also called directive controls, represent a broad set of actions, policies, procedures, and standards put in place in an organization to govern the actions of people and information systems. They are implemented by creating and following organizational policy, procedure, or regulation. User training and awareness fall into this category. Technical controls, also called logical controls, are the programs and mechanisms on information systems that control system behavior and user access. They are implemented using software, hardware, or firmware that restricts logical access in an information technology system. Examples are protocols, encryption, system access, etc. Physical controls are used to manage physical access to information systems such as application servers and network devices. They are implemented with physical devices such as locks, fences, gates, and security guards. To understand and appropriately implement access controls, understanding the benefits that each control can add to security is vital. There are 6 access control types. Preventive controls prevent actions. They apply restrictions to what a potential user, authorized or unauthorized, can do. An example of an administrative preventive control is pre-employment drug screening, which is designed to prevent an organization from hiring an employee who is using illegal drugs. Detective controls are controls that send alerts during or after an attack. Intrusion detection systems alerting after an attack, closed-circuit television, CCTV cameras alerting guards to an intruder, and a building alarm system triggered by an intruder are all examples of detective controls. Corrective controls correct a damaged system or process. They work hand in hand with detective controls. Antivirus software has both components. First, it runs a scan and uses its definition file to detect if there is any software that matches its virus list. If it detects a virus, the corrective controls take over, placing the suspicious software in quarantine or deleting it from the system. Deterrent controls reduce the likelihood of a vulnerability being exploited without actually reducing the exposure. After a security incident has occurred, recovery controls may be needed to restore functionality to the system and the organization. Recovery means the system must be recovered and reinstalled from OS media or images, data restored from backups, etc. A compensative control is an additional or alternative security control put in place to compensate for weaknesses in others. In the current financial year, Nutri Worldwide Inc. has decided to focus on information security. As a part of this initiative, security training on strengthening the password management process was arranged. Kevin was a part of this training. Would this training fall under the administrative controls or technical controls category? This training falls under the administrative controls category. Now that we have reviewed the access control concepts, we can discuss the different access control models. Controlling access by a subject, an active entity such as an individual or process, to an object, a passive entity such as a file, involves setting up access rules. These rules can be classified into 3 categories or models. Kevin had worked on a project for the Human Resources Department last year. The HR department wanted to strengthen the security model deployed for protection of highly confidential data, the salaries of executive employees. The access to this data is usually given to the senior HR managers only. What security model is deployed in such cases? When information classification and confidentiality is very important, the MAC model is used. Once an organization determines the type of access control model it is going to use, it needs to identify and refine its technologies and techniques to support that model. The following sections describe the access controls and technologies available to support the different access control models. In this screen, we will discuss the access control administration. Access control implementations are as diverse as their requirements. However, access control can be divided into 2 domains: centralized access control and decentralized distributed access control. In the following sections, we summarize the mechanisms to achieve both types. The 2 types of access control administration are centralized and decentralized. Centralized access control is concentrated at one logical point for a system or organization. Instead of using local access control databases, systems authenticate via third-party authentication servers. Centralized access control can be used to provide single sign-on, SSO, where a subject may authenticate once and access multiple systems. One entity, department, or individual is responsible for overseeing access to all corporate resources. This type of administration provides a consistent and uniform method of controlling users' access rights. The advantage of centralized access control is strict control and uniformity of access. The disadvantage is central administration can be overloaded. Let us look at an example. The security administrator entity configures the mechanisms that enforce access control, processes any changes that are needed to a user's access control profile, disables access when necessary, and completely removes these rights when a user is terminated, leaves the company, or moves to a different position. In decentralized access control, resource owners are responsible for access control. This method gives control of access to people closer to the resources who may better understand who should and should not have access to certain files, data, and resources. Decentralized access control allows the IT administration to be closer to the mission and operations of the organization. With it, an organization spans multiple locations, and the local sites support and maintain independent systems, access control databases, and data. Decentralized access control is also called distributed access control. The advantage of decentralized access control is it is more flexible compared to centralized access control. However, controls may not be uniform throughout organization, which can be its major disadvantage. Let us look at an example. A trusted computer system, a system that has hardware and software controls ensuring data integrity. In the next screen, we will look at the authentication system, Radius. Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service, Radius, is a third-party authentication system. It is a network protocol and provides client-server authentication and authorization and audits remote users. A network may have access servers, a modem pool, DSL, ISDN, or T1 line dedicated for remote users to communicate. The access server requests the remote user's logon credentials and passes them to a Radius server, which houses the usernames and password values. The remote user is a client of the access server, and the access server is a client of the Radius server. It encrypts only passwords. Radius is a client-server protocol that runs in the application layer using UDP as transport. It uses 8 bits for the attribute value pair, AVP field. It is described in RFCs 2865 and 2866 and uses User Datagram Protocol, UDP, ports 1812 authentication and 1813 accounting. Radius is considered an AAA system, comprising three components: authentication, authorization, and accounting. It authenticates a subject's credentials against an authentication database. It authorizes users by allowing access to specific data objects. It accounts for each data session by creating a log entry for each Radius connection made. The three functions that Radius serves are to authenticate users or devices before granting them access to a network, to authorize those users or devices for certain network services, and to account for usage of those services. Next, we will look at another type of authentication system, TACX and TACX+. Terminal Access Control System, TACX, is a remote authentication protocol used to communicate with an authentication server commonly used in Unix networks. It is a centralized access control system that requires users to send an ID and a static reusable password for authentication. TACX uses UDP port 49 and may also use TCP. Reusable passwords are not secure, hence, the improved TACX+ provides better password protection by allowing two-factor strong authentication. It is not backwards compatible with TACX. It uses TCP port 49 for authentication with the TACX+ server. It allows users to employ dynamic, one-time passwords, which provides more protection. It is more secure than Radius and encrypts all data. Let us discuss Diameter in the next screen. Diameter is Radius's successor, designed to provide an improved authentication, authorization, and accounting AAA framework. Radius provides limited accountability and has problems with flexibility, scalability, reliability, and security. Diameter also employs encryption to protect sensitive information. Diameter supports all forms of remote connectivity and uses 32 bits for the attribute value pair AVP field. It uses TCP port 3868. Diameter Security uses existing encryption standards, including Internet Protocol Security, IPsec, or Transport Layer Security, TLS. It is a peer-based protocol which allows client or server to initiate communication. It also has better error detection, correction, failover functionality than Radius. The subsequent screen will cover the next topic, that is, accountability. Accountability holds users accountable for their actions. This is done by logging and analyzing audit data. Enforcing accountability helps keep honest people honest. For some users, knowing data is logged is not enough to provide accountability. They must know the data is logged and audited, and that sanctions may result from violation of policy. Auditing capabilities ensure users are accountable for their actions, verify if the security policies are enforced, and can be used as investigation tools. Accountability is tracked by recording user, system, and application activities. This recording is done through auditing functions and mechanisms within an operating system or application. Audit trails contain information about operating system activities, application events, and user actions. Items and actions to be audited can become an endless list. A security professional should be able to assess an environment and its security goals. The professional should have knowledge of the actions to be audited and what to do with the captured information without wasting extra disk space, CPU power, and staff time. The following gives a broad overview of the items and actions that can be audited and logged. System-level events like system performance, logon attempts, successful and unsuccessful, date and time of each logon attempt, etc. Application-level events like error messages, modification of files, etc. User-level events like identification and authentication attempts, commands initiated, etc. The next topic is access control monitoring, which is discussed in the following screens. Access control monitoring is a method of keeping track of who attempts to access specific company resources. It is an important detective mechanism, and different technologies exist that can fill this need as discussed in this section. In this screen, we will discuss unauthorized disclosure of information. Several technologies can make information available to unauthorized individuals with unfavorable results. It can be done intentionally or unintentionally. Information can be disclosed unintentionally when one falls prey to attacks that specialize in causing this disclosure. These attacks include social engineering, covert channels, malicious code, and electrical airwave sniffing. Information can be disclosed accidentally through object reuse methods, which are explained next. Object reuse means before someone uses a hard drive, floppy disk, or tape, it should be cleared of any residual information. The sensitive information that may be left by a process should be securely cleared before allowing another process the opportunity to access the object. This ensures that information not intended for the individual or any other subject is not disclosed. For example, old system allocated to a new employee without erasing the old data. Methods for clearing the information from media include destruction, degaussing, overwriting, etc. Under emanation security, all electronic devices emit electrical signals. These signals can hold important information, and if an attacker buys the right equipment and positions in the right place, this information can be captured from the airwaves and data transmissions can be accessed, similar to directly tapping on the network wire. The equipment can reproduce data streams and display the data on the intruder's monitor, enabling the intruders to learn, uncover, and exploit confidential information. Countermeasures for this type of intrusions are Tempest, white noise, and control zone. Let us describe each of them briefly. Tempest equipment is implemented to prevent intruders from picking up information through the airwaves with listening devices. This type of equipment must meet the specific standards of providing Tempest shielding protection and must be rated for the same. Tempest refers to standardized technology that suppresses signal emanations with shielding material. The devices, monitors, computers, printers, etc., have an outer metal coating referred to as a Faraday cage. This is made of metal with the necessary depth to ensure only a certain amount of radiation is released. Tempest technology is complex, cumbersome, and expensive, and therefore only used in highly sensitive areas that need this high level of protection. Two alternatives to Tempest exist. Use white noise or a control zone concept. White noise is a countermeasure used to keep intruders from extracting information from electrical transmissions. White noise is a uniform spectrum of random electrical signals. It is distributed over the full spectrum so the bandwidth is constant and an intruder is not able to decipher real information from the random noise or information. Another alternative to using Tempest equipment is to use the control zone concept. Some facilities use material in their walls to contain electrical signals. This prevents intruders from accessing information emitted via electrical signals from network devices. This control zone creates a type of security perimeter and is constructed to protect against unauthorized access to data or compromise of sensitive information. For example, creating control zones using Faraday's cage and jammers. The next screen talks about the intrusion detection system. Intrusion detection systems, IDSs, are different from traditional firewall products as they are designed to detect a security breach. Intrusion detection is the process of detecting an unauthorized use of or attack upon a computer, network, or telecommunications infrastructure. IDSs are designed to aid in mitigating the damage caused by hacking or breaking into sensitive computer and network systems. The intent of the IDS tool is to spot suspicious activity on the network and sound an alarm by flashing a message on the network manager screen, possibly sending a page, or even reconfiguring a firewall's ACL setting. The IDS tools can look for sequences of data bits that might indicate a questionable action or event, or monitor system log and activity recording files. Although different types of IDS products are available, they all have three common components: sensors, analyzers, and administrator interfaces. The sensors collect traffic and user activity data and send them to an analyzer, which looks for suspicious activity. If the analyzer detects an activity it is programmed to deem as fishy, it sends an alert to the administrator's interface. IDSs come in two main types: network-based, which monitors network communications, and host-based, which can analyze the activity within a particular computer system. A network-based IDS, NIDS, uses sensors, which are host computers, with the necessary software installed, or dedicated appliances, each with its network interface card, NIC, in promiscuous mode. When an NIC is put into promiscuous mode, The NIC driver captures all traffic, makes a copy of all packets, and passes one copy to the TCP stack and another copy to an analyzer to look for specific patterns. An NIDS monitors network traffic and cannot see the activity going on inside a computer. To monitor the activities within a computer system, a company would need to implement a host-based IDS. A host-based IDS, HIDS, can be installed on individual workstations and/or servers to watch for inappropriate or anomalous activity. HIDSs are usually used to ensure users do not delete system files, reconfigure important settings, or put the system at risk in any other way. Whereas the NIDS understands and monitors the network traffic, a HIDS's universe is limited to the computer. A HIDS does not understand or review network traffic, and a NIDS does not look in and monitor a system's activity. Each has its own job, and they don't interfere with the other. In the next screen, we will look at access control monitoring. Access control threats are the agents that have a direct negative impact on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets. The objective of this section is to explain the prominent threats to access controls the security professional will face. We will also discuss the best practices to be followed in access control. In this slide, we will discuss some of the common threats to information security and access control. Denial of service, DOS, or distributed denial of service, DDoS, is an attack that disables a service or makes it unreachable to its users. A distributed denial of service, DDoS attack, is an attack launched from many places at once. The objective of a DDoS attack is to incapacitate a system or service in a way that is difficult to block. Backdoor attacks happen when, during the development of an application, the creator or programmer has the ability to include special access capabilities hidden within the application known as backdoors or trapdoors. Spoofing or masquerading is the act of appearing to a system as if communication from an attacker is actually coming from a known and trusted source. Man-in-the-middle is a form of active eavesdropping in which the attacker makes independent connections with the victims and relays messages between them, making them believe they are talking directly to each other over a private connection, when in fact, the entire conversation is controlled by the attacker. A replay attack is a form of network attack in which a valid data transmission is maliciously or fraudulently repeated or delayed. TCP hijacking is an attack to gain unauthorized access to information or services of a computer system. Social engineering is the art of manipulating people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. Dumpster diving is a tactic used by information thieves to get corporate proprietary data, credit card numbers, and other personal information gleaned from what people and companies throw away. Password guessing is a common form of attack against an information system. It is an attempt to guess someone's legitimate logon credentials. The two common methods are brute force attack and dictionary attack. In a brute force attack, an intruder will try numerous passwords with the hope that one of them will work. A brute force attack consists of sequential guesses at a password until the correct value is found. This type of attack can take a long time, since there can be millions of possible passwords for a given user account. An intruder may use a dictionary attack, where the common passwords are tried to check if the intruder can get lucky and gain entry into a target system. If the intruder is attempting to gain entry using a specific person's user ID, the next step is to try and find out personal information about that person, such as birth date, pet's name, partner's name, and try combinations of these to gain entry to a system. Trojan horse is a general term referring to programs that appear desirable, however actually contain undesirable content. A Trojan horse purports to perform an action the user wants while secretly performing other potentially malicious actions. In phishing, the attacker sends forged emails that appear to have originated from a financial institution or other high-value organization. The forged email will contain instructions that direct the recipient to click on a link and provide information on a form. The victim is led to believe that the institution will be helped by verifying these sensitive credentials, when in reality, they are handing those credentials over to a criminal. In a pharming attack, An attacker directs traffic destined for a specific website to an imposter site, usually for the purpose of harvesting logon credentials from unsuspecting users. Software exploitation occurs when an attacker uses a program that presents the user with a fake logon screen, which tricks the user into attempting to log on. The user is asked for a username and password, which are stored for the attacker to access at a later time. The user does not know this is not the usual logon screen, as it looks exactly like the actual logon screen. A fake error message can appear, indicating that the user mistyped his credentials. At this point, the fake logon program exits and hands control over to the operating system, which prompts the user for a username and password. The user assumes he mistyped his information and doesn't give a second thought, but an attacker now knows that user's credentials. The next screen will discuss the best practices for access control. The following is a list of tasks that must be performed on a regular basis to ensure security stays at a satisfactory level. Deny access to systems by undefined users or anonymous accounts. Limit and monitor the usage of administrator and other powerful accounts. Suspend delay access capability after a specific number of unsuccessful logon attempts. Remove obsolete user accounts as soon as the user leaves the company. Suspend inactive accounts after 30 to 60 days. Enforce strict access criteria. Enforce the need to know and least privilege practices. Disable unnecessary system features, services, and ports. Replace default password settings on accounts. Limit and monitor global access rules. Ensure logon IDs are non-descriptive of job function. Remove redundant resource rules from accounts and group memberships. Remove redundant IDs, accounts, and role-based accounts from resource access lists. Enforce password rotation. Enforce strong password requirements. Audit system, user events, actions, and review reports periodically. Protect audit logs. Let us summarize the topics covered in this domain. Access controls protect systems and resources from unauthorized access. To be able to access a set of data or a resource, a subject has to be identified, authenticated, and authorized. Biometrics based on individuals' physiological and behavioral characteristics is one of the most effective and accurate methods of verifying identification. Memory cards and smart cards are used widely in identity verification. Authorization is based mainly on 4 concepts. They are need-to-know principle, authorization creep, access control list, ACL, and default to 0. Controls are implemented to mitigate risk and reduce the potential for loss. The 2 types of access control administration are centralized and decentralized. Accountability holds users accountable for their actions.